As a result of the French and Indian War, the North America of 1775 was divided between the European powers Britain and Spain, with 13 British colonies flourishing along the Atlantic coast. Issues like taxation without representation developed a rift between the colonies and the British Parliament. So when Massachusetts formed a separate government and its own militia, British General Gage ordered troops to take the rebels' munitions at Concord. On the way, the first shots were fired at Lexington, April 19th. The war was on. A force of 83 men, led by Ethan Allen, captured Fort Ticonderoga on May 11th. At the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17th, British troops dislodged the Americans, but suffered heavy casualties, losing almost half their force. On July the 3rd, George Washington, experienced from the French and Indian War, took command of the Continental forces. With Washington's permission, Benedict Arnold led a force of 650 against Quebec, hoping to gain Canadian support. Another American force under command of General Richard Montgomery moved toward Canada to counter British commander Carleton. En route to Quebec, Montgomery's troops captured Montreal. Montgomery joined Arnold's siege of the walled city of Quebec, but their joint attack was repulsed and Montgomery was killed. At Boston, Washington used the artillery captured at Fort Ticonderoga to seize the high ground around the city, forcing the British under General William Howe to evacuate and march. But they would meet again. Anticipating the next British offensive in the mid-Atlantic, Washington moved his troops to New York. Arnold's siege of Quebec had to be abandoned with the arrival of British reinforcements, forcing him to retreat to Fort Ticonderoga in May. Though the war would continue, a milestone was reached on July 4th. The Second Continental Congress passed the Declaration of Independence. This did not stop the British. Believing that the core of the rebellion was centered in New England, their strategy was to split the colonies in half and isolate the North. Carleton would descend from Canada. Howe would attack New York and move north. On July 12th, Howe's forces landed unopposed on Staten Island. Outnumbering the Americans 4-1, Howe defeated Washington in the Battle of Long Island. Washington then evacuated New York to avoid being trapped by the British in lower Manhattan. But Howe countered with a move to the mainland to outflank him. They met at White Plains at the end of October, where Washington was again defeated. Remarkably, Howe did not pursue the Continental Army and allowed them to escape to Pennsylvania. The onset of the northeastern winter sent the British Army to New York and garrisons in New Jersey. Washington needed a victory. Learning that the British outpost in Trenton was unprepared, Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas. The Continental troops achieved complete surprise, and the Hessian garrison surrendered. As the British sent relief, Washington outflanked them and scored another victory at Princeton. When the British abandoned their third outpost, Washington set up winter quarters in Morristown. In another move to isolate New England in 1777, British General John Burgoyne led another force from Canada and moved south. He captured Fort Ticonderoga after taking a strategic height the Americans had left unfortified. Meanwhile, British Colonel Barry St. Leger was dispatched from Montreal to lay siege on Fort Stanwix. But an American relief force defeated St. Leger at the Battle of Oriskany and forced him back to Canada. Burgoyne's supply problems had become difficult. He sent a force to capture provisions at Bennington, but it was routed by the Americans. Despite his problems, he was determined to press south, but several battles with heavy casualties forced him back to Saratoga, where Burgoyne was confronted with a force 3 times his own. He surrendered on October 17th. It would prove to be a key victory. While Burgoyne had been advancing down the Hudson Valley, William Howe began his campaign for Philadelphia. Howe sailed from New York to the head of the Chesapeake Bay. Washington countered by moving troops into a defensive position at Brandywine Creek. The British attacked, forcing the Americans to fall back to Philadelphia. Another American defeat was sustained at Paoli. With Howe's forces approaching the Continental capital, Congress fled to York. In hopes of rousting the British from Philadelphia, Washington planned an intricate attack on Germantown, but his assault failed. Winter brought the Continental Army to Valley Forge. During this time, France formed an alliance with the United States, encouraged by the success at Saratoga. Henry Clinton replaced Howe and was ordered to move the British Army to New York to guard against the new French threat. Learning of Clinton's withdrawal from Philadelphia, Washington left Valley Forge in pursuit. The two armies met at Monmouth Courthouse. Though the battle was indecisive, American forces beat back repeated British assaults and obtained a moral victory. Clinton left for New York, while Washington moved to White Plains. Unable to prevail in the North, British strategists turned to the South, where they believed that there were more loyalists and more valuable raw materials. In December, a British expedition under the command of Archibald Campbell took Savannah. The British moved quickly into the interior, capturing Augusta on January 29th. The Americans and French retaliated with a siege of Savannah, but because it was moving too slowly for the French, the Allies made a premature assault that resulted in British victory. The French fleet withdrew. The British redoubled efforts. Clinton sailed from New York and joined Prevost in the siege of Charleston. American General Benjamin Lincoln surrendered the city on May 12th in a costly defeat. Clinton left General Charles Cornwallis in command of the South. Cornwallis then moved inland, crushing a hastily prepared American defense at Camden. As Cornwallis moved into North Carolina, the Loyalists protecting his flank were defeated by frontiersmen on Kings Mountain. With that setback, Cornwallis did not want to enter North Carolina and retreated to Winnsboro for the winter. After assuming command of the American Southern Army, General Nathanael Greene devised a plan to harass the British without committing his smaller army to a full-scale battle. He split his forces to disrupt British flanks. Cornwallis ordered Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton to intercept the force under American Daniel Morgan, but Morgan defeated Tarleton's Tory Legion at the Battle of Kelpers. Cornwallis then pursued Morgan into central North Carolina. Morgan united with Greene and led Cornwallis on an exhausting chase, who finally stopped pursuit at the Dan River. When reinforcements increased Greene's army, he went back after Cornwallis, seriously damaging his forces at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Too weak to continue his campaign against Greene, Cornwallis retreated to Wilmington. The British general believed the Carolinas could not be secured as long as Virginia was a supply base for the Americans. He needed a position where he could maintain a link by sea with Clinton in New York. Cornwallis chose Yorktown. Washington, however, saw that Yorktown was vulnerable to a blockade. French Admiral de Grasse moved his fleet to Hampton Roads. To support the British offensive, Clinton sent Admiral Thomas Graves from New York, but his fleet was intercepted by de Grasse and defeated in the Battle of the Capes. American and French forces then laid siege to the British garrison at Yorktown. After 3 weeks, his outer line broken, his inner line struck by artillery, trapped against the York River, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. The Treaty of Paris ended the Revolutionary War on September 3, 1783. Benjamin Franklin and John Jay not only secured independence, but the entire region from the Appalachians to the Mississippi River.